Dr. Ongama Mtimka, I'm so excited and honored to have you here on the Penuel show. I wanted to ask, as an opener, your surname is spelled incorrectly? Is your surname spelled incorrectly?
No, my surname is Mtimka. By the way, the honor is mine, Penuel. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, sir.
Really amazing work you guys are doing. Congratulations on the numbers for the channel.
Thank you. No, shout out to the production team. I know we were teasing each other just now, but Sizwe, Khomutso, Tibogo, Yenzi, Q, and anyone else who's involved, shout out to them. They do amazing work. I am a fan of them. So I think we have a really great relationship. But thank you for the kudos. Your surname?
It's not misspelled. Well, yeah, it's Mtimka. That's what it is.
MTI.
MKA.
So with Nguni languages, and look, we have I don't think we had an alphabet officially in South Africa until colonizers came through. So we may have had an alphabet in the rest of Africa historically.
Sure.
And then they came and they brought this alphabet, and then we had Mtata, M-T-A-T-A, and then it's changed to Mtata now, which it is.
Yeah.
And Tata Machans at some point. Yeah. So with Mtimka, my assumption would be T-H.
Mtimka.
Yeah.
I see. I don't know, actually, because some people within the family would say they are Mtimka.
Yeah.
But mostly we are Mtimka.
Oh, Mtimka.
Mtimka, yeah.
Do you recognize yourself? Recognize as Mtimka?
By the way, the surnames themselves are colonial.
Okay.
Because Amaxhosa, actually, their practice was almost like the Jews. Ongama Kamzimas. So
okay.
I would be Ongama of my father. Apparently surnames are not always there. It's the clan names that are
sure.
not an introduction of colonialism.
There's an amazing I don't know if he's a lecturer, prof. I don't know if it's Joseph from Namibia. I'll find his name.
Sure.
But he gives a very nice talk. I think it was at the University of Mpumalanga about how surnames are colonial. And it was a way to track people. And you know, when I say this to black Africans, they get angry. Nina Penuel, senfunde kakhulu. And you're like, no, but even the Zulu king is Umisu Zulu kaZwelithini. Ushaka kasenza ngakhona.
Exactly.
We may have clan names and we may have lineage and a way to track it.
Yeah.
But not in the formality that we have it now, where we almost don't even know. And why this is significant in the black families, because this thing of surname has become so sacred that it affects paternity, it affects your culture. There are clashes between the parents of children. A child says, "Mina ngumtimka, you can't tell me," and you're like, hey, actually, you're not. Utata was from Emazulwini or he's from Lesotho, and now you're like, you can't tell me I'm a Xhosa boy, and you're like, actually, your lineage is not what you think it is. So it becomes a conversation that we'll probably need to have at some point.
It's interesting. Look, I think that there are two ways in which we relate with these things that affect identity for me. One, to what extent are they useful?
Correct.
And I think that surnames, colonial as they may be, they're like suits, in the sense that they are useful. You know, they help us to be able to track from which family so and so comes from,
sure.
To the extent that we're not even certain about our lineages. So, for example, with me, Mtimka, Mtoseli, Mchekula, Gongleka, these are surnames. Were apparently 7 brothers.
Okay.
Who then branch out and call them, name their descendants after these surnames. But we know when we meet, and then the rest of my family that still practices amasiko. When we go and have events, or let me say when they go and have events, it's known that if you have Mtoseli in the house, a guy from KwaMtoseli, you have your own dad.
That's family.
You know, that's family. So they're useful to the extent that, for me, I don't think they would constitute, in our debates about decoloniality, one of those things that should be priority in terms of what we deal with.
Okay.
They help us more than they distract us.
The importance of bringing in the woman's lineage. A woman gets fresh from the Pedi tribe. A woman gets fresh from Eswatini. she has your children, and those children automatically become Xhosa then, and then you almost lose that leg of lineage.
That's interesting. So yeah, and again, there, from a functional point of view, what its implications are, I don't know.
Okay.
But I think that to the extent that we need to be humble about who we are, we need to recognize that the sometimes tribal politics that we get into are complex by our own lineage. So for example, in my family, in fact, there's a lot of Xhosa clan names that have got Msutu in them. So mine, for example, Jambasa, Mfene, Lisa, has got Msutu as part of it. My wife, who comes from the Mbondo area, Umatikizela, Umangutyana, has got Msutu in it. I think there's a few others. And so when people talk about this, they'd say this attests to the Sutu influences in some of these. And some people would say, actually, all the animal clan names in isiXhosa relate to Sutu. You know, so the importance of that from a decolonial scholarship perspective, and I think I'm self-contradicting myself here. The importance of that is that tribal identity is complex when looked at from individual heritages. And if that is the case, then the appeals to nationhood, the idea that we are bigger as a people in a particular geography than our individual clans, becomes instructive, becomes helpful and useful in our thoughts about nationhood. If purely from the complex genealogies that we have. It's an interesting, I'm finding my path, you're helping me find a path here into decolonial conceptions of nation. Through this discussion, it's a very interesting one.
You mentioned the Jews, and the history of surnames is very varied around the world. One of them being, if you look at Afrikaans surnames here, but more especially Dutch, the Van der Merwe, Van Jaarsveld, sorry, the Van is from Ugutu Pumapi. And to what you're saying about practicality of names or surnames, which are identifiers, which are meant to be identifiers of maybe a language, a culture. If you say I'm from Pedi, if I'm from Emadadeni, I can make many assumptions about you. And maybe when we do have these sit downs, if ever in future some scholars decide to, maybe when we start looking at them going into, so we speak about the animal totems, but then also the geographical. Penuel was in Newcastle, and you're like, oh, okay, I can understand. Ongama from Pedi, Ongama from Gqeberha. You're like, no, I can make many assumptions if he was raised there. And if ever, when you describe him, Ongama was Gqeberha, nase Pedi, nase Khini, Emakhanda, you can actually trace a line of, I know the influences he had, more than just Mtimka from New York. Oh, I'm Mtimka. Apparently, I've got family back in South Africa. I don't know them. Apparently, I'm Xhosa. I don't know. And you're like, if you were more New York, we'd have a greater understanding. But with the lineage of from Xhosa, South Africa, whatever the case may be, you know what I mean?
Sure. Yeah, that's awesome. That's really awesome. So I mentioned the thing about humility when it comes to our sense of who we are. One, there's a need for one taking pride in who you are.
Correct.
But also a degree of humility. Humility in the sense that, you see, whenever appeals are made to a proud lineage, they almost always lead to a temptation of superiority.
Correct.
A superiority complex.
Of course.
I'm going to use an example that is biblical. Sorry for that. So the person who writes a lot to the Gentiles says, what things I counted as gain to me, one, having been a Jew, two, having gone to the best school of the time by Gamaliel, I count it as loss for the sake of a greater multi-ethnic community under MSI. Anyway, so I'm using this to say sometimes it's good to take pride in your sense of self.
Yeah.
But thank goodness for the people that wrote Nkosi Sikelela noTamaxhosa Party Africa. Maluphakanyisa uphondo lwayo as a bigger geographic area.
Yeah.
Now, if I think and I conceptualize of myself as part of a broader Africa, I then become a little humble in terms of how I treat a person of Shona descent within my own country.
Yeah. Your top 3 movies before we go and speak culture and what. Top 3 movies, just off top of your head.
Okay. It has to be that entire series of Has Fallen. Olympus Has Fallen.
Okay. This is Gerard Butler.
Yes.
Okay.
London Has Fallen. And what's the other one again? There's a third one.
If you don't remember, I'll find it for you quickly.
Yeah. So I love that series.
What's special about it?
So it's the brilliance of strategy, how to survive when you are under a siege, and you are outnumbered and outgunned and betrayed.
Sure.
How
Angel Has Fallen.
Angel Has Fallen.
Okay.
Yeah. In fact, I might have started with watching Angel Has Fallen.
Okay.
And then went on to watch Olympus, which I think is the first one, and then London.
I've only seen London.
Yeah. It's a lovely. So the main character, his name again,
Gerard Butler. True state of emergency, a real state of emergency, not the ones we've had.
My favorite scene, I think it's from Angel Has Fallen.
Okay.
Is when he comes back to pick up the president from hospital after he has foiled this conspiracy that there's the people who are trying to frame him for attempting to assassinate the president are in fact the ones under whose custodianship the president is now held. So but the brilliant part for me is when he's now successfully moved him from the hospital they are running.
Sure.
And they are going to run to another building. So I think they drive, I'm not mistaken.
Sure.
Now, the plan is, look, we are now going to move you to go into this building. The rule is don't stop. The guys who are going to be shielding you are going to fall. I don't want you to stop. We just move. And so they execute the strategy. And indeed, the ones that are shielding the president keep falling, but they move on into the building. It's amazing. I mean, I love strategy.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Have you seen the Bourne series?
Yeah.
Matt Damon.
Yeah, that's another.
It's making me feel similar vibes.
Yeah.
Those are the type of films you're into.
I enjoy those films. I really enjoy them.
If you became a filmmaker, that would be you.
I went in 2002 to study at Rhodes to become a film director.
Okay.
And I didn't become one, but yeah, it's interesting.
Didn't become one yet. We'll put the yet,
no. So it's something that lingers at the back of my mind as to whether I'd eventually do it.
Is it still a passion?
It is.
Do you watch a lot of movies? Do you study movies? Do you think I would have executed this better? And
not as much as so I'm not as technically aware of the production elements as much as I would love to. In fact, when I was watching lots of movies and sometimes not working on my PhD when I should have, I'd be saying to myself, I need to learn this art so that I can be, better and write my own scripts and stuff. I was not as intentional, but I know, for example, I'm doing interviews for my book, Pathways to Inclusion, A Political Economy of South Africa in the 21st Century.
Please say that again slowly. Pathways to Inclusion.
a political economy of South Africa in the 21st century.
Okay.
As I speak to these wonderful entrepreneurs, I'm like, I could be telling the story on an audiovisual platform.
Yeah.
And I've made some attempts, and I know that I don't want to make it newsy in terms of the style of shooting.
Oh, documentary, sit down, interview.
Exactly.
Okay.
So I'm picturing lovely visual, lovely close-ups, lovely drone footage of where they work and what they do, and as part of the cutaways when telling the story. So yeah, I want to mix of the creative filmmaking genre with ordinary documentary slash news.
Sure.
Okay. So yeah, there's that lingering somewhere in my spirit.
When are we getting the book?
It should be latest June next year.
June 2025.
Yeah.
What drew you to filmmaking? So you're speaking about maybe not being as in tune with technical. So what is it that made you say, no, I wanna study film, drama. I wanna create movies?
Telling stories is my purpose, my passion, and who I am.
Even now.
As you can see, I love to talk.
Yeah.
So the range of skills aligned to my sense of purpose and destiny.
Yeah.
Writing, editing, listening to wonderful stories, and telling them. So that's what draws me to it. Every time, so I do business plans and feasibility studies for clients. So every time I'm working on a construction, say, for argument's sake, construction business plan, I'm like, wow, people make money doing this. Maybe I should, this is something I can do. And then an inner voice says to me, no, your gold is telling stories. That's where your gold is. So what someone else may thrive, in, whether it be construction or whatever the case may be, mine is telling stories. By the way, and I'm sorry to do this again. So I'm a person who's deeply spiritual.
Okay.
And I one time there was a guy that preached at our church about an idea called Jehovah Jimola, which means the God of recompense.
Recompense. Jehovah Jimola.
Yeah. Now, this guy preaches this message. He's from the US, as an African American, now he's late. So I say, okay, God, if this is who you are, tell me, what is our recompense as the people of the Eastern Cape? Because indeed, we've been victims of colonialism. Our poverty was manufactured over time. Now, I need you, because now we've cried out to you, many of us. In fact, to such an extent that we get mocked. We keep, crying out to you, and there's no economic returns.
Yeah.
His answer, I believe, to me says, you know what? Your sense of heritage, your sense of story, your stories and your heritage is the kind of gold that could not be told by anyone, that could not be mined by anyone. So if you are going to use something that's going to be for you what gold was to those that came and overpowered you, it's going to be your stories. And by the way, when you tell the stories and you apply diligence and excellence to do it, you will see the financial rewards. And this will be something which becomes to you a source of comfort, because you would have had something which, look, nobody can tell our stories the same way that we can.
Never.
Nobody can mine our heritage the same way that we can. So we mustn't be looking at the minerals and saying we lost out. Yeah, the minerals are important. We must reclaim them as much as we can. But there's even more worth and wealth in the things that nobody else understands, but when we give impressions of it to the world goes, wow. Think of it as vibranium. What is it called?
It is vibranium.
In Black Panther.
I've got so much to say. Let me start off with these definitions. You said the god of, or you said recompense.
The god of recompense.
Recompense.
Yeah.
I looked up the wrong thing.
Sure.
Recompense. Let's start here. Jehovah Jamola, the Lord who rewards. He rewards those who diligently seek him, and he also repays evil. The word also means recompense. He will repay injustices on our behalf. I think it's very important. As you speak about the gold that is our heritage and our storytelling, one of the conversations I've had, even with Utebzai Tribal, is I've gotten tired with the remaking of Ushaga, of which Ushaga Ilembe has been a sensational production. Rumors of 900 million rand budget, Nomzamo Mbatha, they've won awards. The soundtrack, which was partly curated by Umbuso Khoza, who I've had the privilege of sitting with here, the beauty of it, the magnificence, it really did rival the old school Shaga of Henry Cele, which wasn't made by South Africans, that people may not know.
Oh, wow.
And what has made me sad is we have so many. Now, our stories are so vast. We could literally speak Greek, Roman mythology. We could speak Hinduism and the stories of the Hindu scriptures. Just the kings, Shwe, some of the Xhosa kings, Oyinza, even Omakanda and all these people. Just those stories. And then go deeper into the other stories that we may have missed. I mean, the story of like a David and a Goliath doesn't need David to be a king. It needs to be a story of a young boy, maybe a Holy Hlahla Mandela, a hurt boy who overcame. Just those stories become something that I think, because our film industry is not mature at that level and we still complain about money, there are ways, writing books, because a lot of these movies now, you look at a huge production now like Dune 2, Denis Villeneuve, who's the director, you look at that, it's an old science fiction book, which has been made a movie. The movies weren't great, but the what it is now from old literature. Write the books. If you're not writing the books, tell the stories. Someone somewhere will then start doing that work. You want to say something?
But here's the thing, Penuel. You cannot realize value unless you have overcome the core idea of colonialism, that all that Africans need in order to succeed is everywhere else but within. Also, so you see that is not you don't fight that in ngedolo phezulu, right? It needs an internal healing and restoration and a relook at who you are from an appreciative perspective. Right? If you continue to see yourself as the one from whom gold was stolen and land was stolen, which is an important story.
Sure.
You will not get to say, what is in me?
Yeah. You'll be a perpetual victim.
That could never be stolen. What is in me that can look?
You're deeply spiritual.
Look at Latuma Nkolo.
Yes.
Right.
Maxhosa.
Latuma is raised by a mother who's a designer who likes making clothes, and then he goes and studies fashion design. In order for him to succeed, he doesn't say, "Let me go to Italy so I can learn the art of design." He takes whatever he has learned while studying in terms of contemporary designs, whatever they study there, and then says, if I bring a sense of who I am to a garment, what is it going to be like? And when I do it, I'm going to realize this is my goal, and I'm going to put the right price tag on it. And I'm going to be bold about how I do it.
Correct.
I once had this a chat with him. He was saying, look, my brand is exclusive. And I put the price tag that I want, right? Why? Because he realizes the value. He realizes that what my mother taught me, what my culture had, has got elements of it which are gold, and I can mine as much as I can, and I can earn a living from it, right? So he goes there and succeeds globally.
Yes.
With Maxhosa. I think it was one in this film, Coming to America too.
It was, with Eddie Murphy. Nomzamo Mbatha's in there as well.
Now this is what happens. We've got the stories, the Black Coffees, the Trevor Noahs, the other people who have done elements of what I'm saying.
Yeah.
I think what I'm wearing is nice. This is what I think. And the person who makes it is Cecily Zingeu back in Gqeberha.
Cecily Zingeu at Gqeberha, yes.
Yeah. So, and by the way, this was I'm on a path that is changing my dress code. Not radically opposed to what I've been wearing. I still don suits and stuff.
Yeah.
But there was this thing that says, there was this urge in my spirit in my 40s to, like, all of a sudden, I mean, I've embraced West African attire, and the feedback I've been getting has been amazing. Again, it's somebody who says there's an element of who we are, which is beautiful in design, which is beautiful as a commercial, as a thing of commercial value, among other things.
My other notes, otherwise I'm going to go on a tangent.
Sure.
My other notes, you speak about two things. I was asking if you're deeply spiritual. One of the things I try to emphasize, especially to Africans, is with colonialism, we were taught that, and we are taught still to this day, to what you were saying, that everything Africa needs is everywhere else but within. And I've said that you've been taught that God is external, and you constantly look somewhere in the sky, and when you want answers, they're never from self. It's always someone else who has to explain. Sure. I think God is angry, I think.
Sure.
Whereas if you were to internalize God in you and find the God in you, whether it's a vibranium, whatever, the gold in you, it becomes something special. I sat with DJ Sbo on the Hustler's Corner in the Virtual Mkuku, maybe last year, if not the year before. And one of the things I said to him, and I said it on another platform, is if only Africans knew that the true wealth of this continent is not in the minerals, but in the people.
Wow.
And I've also said, you look at countries that have unique USPs, unique selling points. When Chinese people arrive in your neighborhood, you have an idea of what they bring. When the Jewish people come into your neighborhood, when Indians come into your neighborhood, when Africans come into your neighborhood, around the world, normally people are not happy. And I've said, we obviously have minerals. And to what you're saying, we need to have the conversation of how do we reclaim, because we still have a lot. Still have a lot of minerals. We even have gas now and uranium, a lot of unexplored. The DRC, Sudan, Angola, we are wealthy for hundreds, maybe even thousands of years on this continent. But outside of just the minerals, which again, we were told by someone else, diamonds are valuable. We were told, and I'll reference diamonds later, gold is valuable. Some of our best exports have been music, black coffee, have been storytelling, whether through comedy like Trevor Noah. It's been Sarafina, The Lion King, with Double Lebo M, and it's staring at us in plain sight.
Yeah.
It's like the things that we are like, hey, all you guys do is make TikTok dance videos. You're like, that's our export.
Sure.
How do you then, like Ulatuma, create IP, maybe learn how the economy of the world work, create IP so that random people are not appropriating your culture, your heritage, your stories, and then you see it in a Marvel movie. You see it in a Black Panther, you're like, hey man, I know those blankets. No, I know, Babu John Kani was there. And you're like, no, we need to do more of this and have a conversation on how we own this thing, so that if Hollywood comes here, if Germany comes here and wants to work with Umamu Esther Mahlangu and design a car, you have to engage us and don't see us as just miners. We are not these kids that are mining blood diamonds. I'm not just going to sing on your song and get $1,000 and clap hands. this song is not just me. It's a representation of my people and in movies, Hans Zimmer is another reference of someone who understands music on a much deeper level of when you bring the sound, and he speaks about The Lion King, which is one of the movies he scored, and how with Lebo M they set, and from the beginning, Coming to America also does the same. It sets a tone. Anyone who is not African immediately is like, I'm in a different world. And African is like, I think I'm at home.
Yeah.
And it's something I think even when you land after traveling internationally, you land back here. And if you hear just that song, you're like, hey, you're like, I'm home. Denzel Washington, this is going to be my last point. Denzel Washington in an interview speaks about the importance of black directors. Because one of the things you said is no one can tell our stories like us. He says he makes a reference to Steven Spielberg and I think Schindler's List. Who did Schindler's List? Is it Spielberg?
Spielberg, yeah.
There's another director.
About Jewish culture.
Anyways, about Jewish culture. So he speaks about Steven Spielberg and he speaks about other directors and he's like, or maybe he speaks about the mafia movies. Oh, Martin Scorsese and mafia movies. He's like, when we ask for African directors or black directors, it is not from maybe a competence or whatever. It's also a culture. It's not a racial thing. It's a cultural thing because this guy understands what it means to perm your hair and have it burning. When you have a black female director who's speaking about a black woman's struggle, she can articulate in a way you'll never understand what it means for a black woman to walk in a room and every man is looking at her and she feels like she's being stripped naked. And you're like, what do you mean? Like, I can articulate that. So the importance of us telling our stories from our perspective, I think is very important.
Yeah, let me start from where you leave things off. So when I conceptualized my book, I was saying I want to talk about inclusion and take that debate to its economic aspects and not its political aspects. One of my interviewees yesterday is a top bank executive. And he says the same things that you say, that look, when you've got diverse teams, you are able to relate better with the customers, the majority of the customers in Africa. And who's going to be the majority of customers in Africa? It's black people.
Mm.
So the director not only understands the casts if they're telling black stories, but also understand what the touch points are if you're telling the story to a mostly black audience.
Mm.
But because they have grown up and this is why, by the way, I don't advance the idea that decoloniality must be complete replacement.
Yeah.
Because they have grown up in a culture that is dominated by Western thought and practice, they will still be able to capture the Western audiences because of the dynamism of the being they have become as a result of this duality. I am a person who has got a Western outlook, but my sense of self imposes itself in whatever I do. And as a result of that, I'm a dynamic film storyteller who can excite a Western audience while also exciting an African audience. Anyway, so I wanted to start there, that inclusion becomes economics then, not purely political calls for political political correctness in the sense that we want equality for political purposes. No, it is because inclusion itself makes economic sense. It makes you relate better with your customers, makes you succeed a lot better. And because you've got people who are both Western oriented and appreciate who they are as Africans, they're going to tell beautiful stories. The other thing that you said, I wanted to talk to and now forgot.
Sorry, I spoke about Denzel. I spoke about the gold within, God being external.
Oh yeah, so let me come there. It's interesting. So I subscribe to systems theory.
Okay, what's systems theory?
General systems theory is the understanding that living organisms are all part of a bigger system.
Mm.
And one of the theorists advances this concept of a holon, Holon.
Mm.
And there is making a reference to the dynamism of living organisms, that they are wholes in themselves, but parts in relation to bigger wholes. So Penuel is a Penuel who is a whole in himself.
Mm.
But Penuel is only a part in relation to the bigger Mlotshwa family,
Mm.
which is only a part in relation to the bigger area from which the Mlotshwas come from.
Sure.
Which is only a part in relation to the province, which is only a part in relation to the country. Now, even your living your organisms, whether they are cells, whatever they are called, I did biology and all of those things up until 7th grade. Beyond that, it was commerce. So pardon me if I stumble over the concepts. But your living organisms are wholes in themselves, but only parts in relation to the bigger whole, which is the organs that they're a part of. But those organs are parts in relation to a bigger whole, which is who you are as a person. I've said all of that to say, one of the key things that we observe in systems theory is that these living organisms are self-determinate, but also interdependent.
Yes.
Now, I've said all of that to say, the human is a very interesting, whether you're going to call it species or creature, is a very interesting in the sense that I'm going to say creature, in the sense that they have in them sovereignty, a sovereign being that is self-determinant and wants to impose him or herself to their environment. But at the same time, it's a being who must relate with others in community, and I argue with bigger realities that are outside themselves. So the idea is to master both the art of coming to know yourself and embracing, as you say, the God within, while at the same time operating in epistemic humility.
Epistemic humility.
Yes. The humility about who you are and what you know. Because it is only when you and I are engaging in what we are talking what we are doing now, that another concept of systems theory, the emergent phenomenon. So you and I are talking, we may be from different vantage points, but the outcome of this conversation is greater than the constitutive parts. It's greater than you and I sitting within the four, whether it's walls of a frame of a camera. What is arriving here, the experience of the the viewer, will be something much more dynamic. Because remember, as they consume what we are talking about, they are also creating it and processing it through who they are, their sense of selves, and different aspects of what you and I can only touch, to them will be illuminated big time. Now, this is me saying, yes, indeed, to the extent that we are created in God's image, we are sovereign beings. But I like what, again, I tend to quote this Paul, who writes to the Gentiles and grafts them in there. He says, have this mind which was also in Yeshua, that though equal, assumed a lowly form, even to the point of death, under humiliating circumstances. And now, because it did that, became elevated. Now, this is the thing about humans, that as long as I arrogantly hold an idea that I'm greater than you, and I will not bring myself to being open enough to be taught by you from your great experiences and knowledge. And as a result of that, I can never be greater than my openness to learn and my openness to teaching. So my view is that the entire human experience ought to be a cumulative learning experience, in terms of which we get to embrace different people and all of those things, so that we could become a greater being than what we were when we first started, even as the different cultures. So the pull towards nationhood is a pull towards a collective that is bigger than the individual constitutive parts. And when we meet at nation, we become bigger than the individual aspects, which is why when I hear divisive politics, I get uncomfortable. I appreciate the ability to speak and make others feel uncomfortable and feel pain, because it's through the pain that we can get to bigger realities,
sure,
bigger knowledges, and thriving as a people.
Yeah, that's a lot. Closing off the film aspect, I find it interesting, and I don't know how you heard this from the Silicon Valley American guys, where they started terming politicians bad actors. That these guys are bad actors. They get given a script, but it's so horrible, it's not even, moving. Of which maybe Barack Obama was a good actor. We have bad actors in South Africa being our politicians who read scripts. One of our favorite, arguably the most popular politician running today, or one of two, between himself and Ubaba Msholozi, Jacob Zuma, Julius Malema, went to go and sit on KFM, and there's a clip that I took from TikTok that was so brilliant. He challenges people to question Cyril Ramaphosa as a player and where he comes from and who funded him. He challenged us to ask certain questions about the late Utatu Mandela, about where he got money to buy his home in Houghton, and. But I'm raising this because I'm bringing the link back to diamonds and how diamonds at some point were almost worthless. And the De Beers company, which eventually got taken over by the Oppenheimers, who eventually sold it, they found ways through Hollywood. Diamond is a girl's best friend. If a man loves you, he'll get you a big rock. And they increased the value of diamonds, which were arguably worthless for many people. One of the things Julius raises, and this is now us now going into your field of political analysis, he speaks about the Oppenheimer family, and a few things stood out for me. The one, Ernest Oppenheimer was the first. He came from Germany, he came to South Africa, he was Jewish, later on would convert to Christianity under the Anglican Church. His kids would do the same. I think the Hersoff family, Rob Hersoff and his family, Slip, etc., they were also of Jewish descent and then became Christian. Oppenheimer came in here, did business, and then later on became a mayor in Kimberley. From being a mayor, he went on to serve in parliament. People may not know this. And it was during that term where he started wrestling for power from Cecil John Rhodes to take over De Beers, got funding from JP Morgan. Half of the funding was from America. JP Morgan, one of the biggest financiers, the men that built America. Part of the funding from the Rothschild family in Europe. And that's how this great company of theirs, Anglo-American, came to be. Anglo from English and then American, but... So it's almost Ernest Oppenheimer, who was then followed by his son Harry Oppenheimer, and then his son Nicky Oppenheimer, and today we've got Jonathan Oppenheimer being the next in that legacy. Served in politics, gained power, maybe used his political power, became really, really big in business. Later on would use the power in business through all the families to fund certain people and handpick arguably people like Cyril Ramaphosa, who's the president now, groom them in a certain way to ensure that they remain relevant in politics. Today you've got, in the past we had Mary Oppenheimer, who is, I think, might be the daughter of Harry. She was funding political parties. No one didn't ask many questions then when they started disclosing. Recently we've got Rebecca Oppenheimer, I think Mary's daughter, studied jazz. She studied jazz. She was at Princeton University. She was a horse show jumper. She's now funding parties like Songezo Zibi's Rise Mzansi, 15 million. Claims she's not involved in the politics, But we're seeing like a behavior from the Oppenheimer family, who some people still say are the owners of South Africa. They're the biggest private land owners. In various ways, they own a lot of land on the African continent. Even though they disappeared from De Beers, they still have a lot of stakes, and they're arguably the third richest, wealthiest family on the continent. Rebecca comes through now, new generation, fun song as Ozibi. Julius Malema raises this. In that sit down, that you've got Oppenheimer family people that claim they are donating, but they are actually forming, which is something they've always been doing. Cyril Ramaphosa was a project that they're milking today. But in the same token, looking at Ernest Oppenheimer and his stint in politics and then pivoting, parlaying that into a big business empire, maybe your thoughts before we delve deep into politics on, do you think Cyril Ramaphosa, his brother-in-law Patrice Motsepe, his brother-in-law Jeff Radebe, maybe some of the female players, Abo Bridget Motsepe, who married Radebe, maybe they are using the same model, maybe did a bit of business. Patrice's father, Augustine, was a businessman. But then getting into politics, maybe using politics, privatization, monopolies, maybe still working with the incumbents and saying in time, we will become the future. There was a Cecil John Rhodes at some point who was an ambassador. Then there was a Oppenheimer at some point. Maybe the future as a form of transformation becomes a Cyril, a Patrice who gets to visit King Charles, who get to help privatize and monopolize on the benefit of the Anglo, the American. And then maybe the Motsepes, the Ramaphosas in future become the next Oppenheimer legacy in various ways. I don't know what you'd have to say about those type of theories and some of these utterings by Julius Silo.
So you reminded me there's one thing I needed to say from your earlier conversation about the film and the storytelling.
Sure.
You were talking about how, for example, when the stories are told, we must be careful not to play minuscule roles when others are coming here and making huge amounts of money.
Correct.
Now, as a strategist, what are the laws of how power plays out in society? It's that the outcomes of human activities favor the powerful.
The outcomes of human activities favor the powerful.
Yeah. The rich rule over the poor. Mm. The borrower is a servant to the lender. There will always be that.
Mm. Credit became the new slavery, yeah.
Yeah, and exactly. And then also, it growing up, okay, maybe not. I mean, I grew up in a rural area. We learned as kids, as boys, who you can pick a fight with, who you cannot.
Yes.
But those were not permanent arrangements.
Hey.
Because...
Come on.
Because then you grew.
Of course.
And all of a sudden, the people who used to bully you look at you and call you booty because of assessments about how power dynamics have changed.
Correct.
Now, in our conceptualization of our struggles, which we do exceptionally well, what we fail to look at is what battles must be fought when, by who. Mm. When the ANC negotiated, was engaged in a negotiated settlement, it was out of a party, both guerrilla movements, Boko and the PAC aligned Boko and the ANC aligned MK.
There wasn't a Zapo there.
I don't know if they were not part of Boko or Zapo. I'm not
okay.
Sure. When my
no problem.
Doesn't serve me well at the moment. Where there's a proper assessment of what are our chances of waging a war and winning.
And winning. Azapo and APLA, I think, was the other association.
Yeah, Boko Loku is APLA.
Is APLA.
Yeah.
Okay.
So then a determination is made. As much as we would love Ongena Schobuluze Pitoli, as they were singing in exile,
Sure.
we cannot do it responsibly and win. So if that's not the battle we can wage and win, which one can we win? It's a negotiation.
This is the art of war, Sun Tzu.
Yes. Because even the very same guerrilla warfare actually is a determination that you cannot face your enemy on a frontal attack. So you need to attack where the enemy is weakest.
Sure.
That's the basics of guerrilla warfare. Now, I want to go with my academic salary and everything else that I have to pick a fight with Oppenheimer, right? I can use my voice because we are in a democracy and I'm allowed to do it. But the reality of the matter is that between the two of us, the one who's got mechanisms to institute a decisive war is clear, and they're going to do it, right? So when what do we do? Like China did. We sit and say, what can we do? What is within our control to do?
Yes.
We do it. We become the laughing stock of the world because made in China is poor quality.
Hong Kong. While at the same time, we're building a power base. When we start having a power base, we build military capabilities. And then only we say to the world, to hell with you. When we need to some degree. I mean, you can always argue that even the Mao Zedong, or even back in those times already, when they were saying we're going to invest in agriculture, we're going to grow, they had to interact with the world, and there's a message they were saying to the world at the time. But for me, priority should be to build a power base. We build businesses. We get economic power. We can leverage whatever policy instruments you can while using the power of the state, and then build a critical mass of a power base that we then use as a mechanism to wage whatever war we want to wage with the rest of the world. But you just don't do it when you don't have the real prospect of success. Correct.
We have in South Africa, I'm going to come to your key question. We have in South Africa people who are warmongers who wouldn't survive 1 minute on a boxing ring.
Who are verbal warmongers?
Yes.
Or verbal?
Verbal warmongers. Who would not survive 1 minute on a boxing ring. Now, the thing about radical speak and warmongering is it's self-gratifying. It's more self-gratifying than somebody who is building
doing the work.
Little by little, I'm building. One moment, I had a mountain of debt. The next moment, I've reduced it by 50%. The next moment, wow, I'm now debt-free. I've got this, that, and the other. You know, it's that incremental power base. So for me, is there generational wars? Sorry, there are generational battles. And as Frantz Fanon says, each generation has its own mission, which it must either fulfill or betray. Mandela, compromised as they were, half imperfect as what they were able to achieve is, all that history is going to judge us for. What did we do when our generation faced the battles of its own generation? Not how much fulfillment we got from critiquing Mandela.
Of course.
Okay.
How well did we criticize the last generation?
Indeed. Now, quick one to your question about the Ramaphosas, the Motsepes, and stuff. Look, history is contested. Let's say that Cyril was a project, so Ramaphosa. Has he gotten in power and defended black economic empowerment? So far, yes, in his first term. Has he gotten in power and defended employment equity, the mechanism without which many black people could not have advanced from general worker to middle income earning South Africans.
Correct.
He didn't get there and reverse it so far. Okay. Could he have done a lot more things? Absolutely. Could Zuma have done a lot more things? Absolutely. Could Mandela and Mbeki have done a lot more things? Absolutely. So, for me, the project-ness of themselves is something great to talk about and critique, especially for us as academics. But did they advance the cause in a little and imperfect way? So far, the answer is yes.
You really believe what you're saying?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay.
Let me
Sorry, before I counter.
Okay. So let's go to 1994.
Yeah.
One, black people are excluded from electricity. Two, black people have settled space under dangerous electricity lines in urban centers because they were not allowed to settle there.
Yeah.
Under former dump sites where they're exposed to methane gas, under floodplains. This ANC government, which I am very critical of,
Yes.
has delivered over 3 million houses which are no longer under dangerous electricity lines, which are no longer under areas where they're exposed to methane gas and floodplains.
Yes.
And I can say this because I've worked in government. Now, also, they have done, I mean, look at KZN, big Dubai port investments, expansions in the Durban port.
Sure.
If you go to the Eastern Cape, a new deep water port, multi-billion rand investment, new deep water port, special economic zones, Kucha, East London, the school infrastructure program. I know of this because the organization I first worked in at Kucha Development Corporation built competencies to roll out infrastructure and started offering that to the public sector. And as I've seen upgrades of hospitals, I've seen the delivery of primary healthcare facilities.
Sure.
You know, so and then you look at housing. There's the RDP, which is for low-income earners. Then there's the finance-linked individual subsidy program, which is run by government, right? For the too rich for RDP, too poor for the mainstream bond on
Is that low-cost housing?
This is so low cost. This is affordable housing.
Is it called affordable housing?
Yeah, somewhere between RDP and mainstream.
No, I know these things. Or tough. And all these, I'm trying to, when they speak low-cost housing, are they speaking that or are they speaking RTP?
So that's another category. That's social housing.
Social housing, affordable housing, low-cost housing.
Social housing is yet another policy instrument. FLISP is for black people accessing property markets.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter what type of housing, as long as you are within that price bracket, right? At some stage, it was as long as you were between $5,000 and 16,000 monthly income, you could get up to 100,000 from government when you're buying a house. And then also there's the social housing, which you are talking about. The availing of decent rental stock, mainly closer to working areas, through developers that are funded by government to develop that rental stock and avail it to, again, that too poor for RDP. Too rich for RDP.
Too poor for
a bond even. And can't even leverage FLISP. And then a whole lot of, I talk in my PhD about these ones. We take for granted progressive taxation system. The idea that the rich get taxed more than their lower income counterparts. South Africa is ranked by Oxfam as among the leading countries from a redistributive tax policy perspective. Okay, then you go to the ATTP program, the Assistance to the Poor program,
Sure.
where municipalities can apply to national government for grants to allow the poor, who have got now RDPs, houses and others, to get particular free kiloliters of water. I don't know, I think also of sanitation and okay, electricity is not, it's also part of that regime.
Sure.
So
The indigent.
Yeah,
those indigent programs where you get free electricity a certain amount.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now you have all of these, which inadvertently, as society moves, those become the base that you take for granted.
Yeah.
And then we want more. Okay.
So I've actually I argued this last week or the week before. This tax, is it not a form of redistribution of wealth? But no one frames it in that way. Sorry.
Two things.
Sorry, I took you off your track. I just wanted to speak on the text.
No, it's still on top. So
Okay.
In two ways. One, from a section of society, it's been increasingly becoming also black. In fact, it's become also black for a long time.
Yeah.
To another section of society. So our dependency ratio in South Africa is very high, which is why we have the black tax phenomenon.
Sure.
Okay. So from individuals to individuals, but also from a geographic perspective under the Division of Revenue Act. Now, for you to see the redistributive power of DORA, go to a country where there's fights about fiscal federalism. I was doing work in South Sudan recently, where there's arguments about how much contribution should oil-generating states make to those that are non-oil generating, as far as revenue sharing mechanisms and stuff.
Why are people in Gauteng subsidizing the Eastern Cape and Limpopo?
Yes.
And Northern Cape?
Yes. And our policy, Division of Revenue Act, allows a use of population and a tax base of regions to be able to redistribute the money. And indeed, the argument for it is strong, because to build Gauteng, you had to destroy the Eastern Cape. You had to destroy KZN. It's not unrelated. This is history, that you had to destroy the mechanisms, the independent economies of the different people that were living in South Africa.
Including the Bantustans?
Yes.
Do you think they were also destroyed for that reason?
Before the Bantustans were created.
Okay.
So in the early diaries of settlers in South Africa, among some of the entries are, this is such a terrible place to find laborers. Because we were not about laborers.
Of course.
Right? We've got an independent economy. Now, to create a pool of mass laborers, you needed to destroy intentionally the economies that black people survived in. So now don't come and tell me about an Eastern Cape migrants problem, when in fact this was a deliberate creation of mining, industrial and agricultural capital in South Africa. It's a historical question. Yes, indeed, there was many ways in which we should have been better stewards of the democratic period. And I think that there was a time that there was intentionality about this. In fact, throughout the 30 years, there's been some intentionality about doing some things. And a lot of things have been done. Am I saying the ANC or any of the presidents of the ANC are the best things since iPhone or whatever? Certainly not. Do I see space for more politicians to come in and build from where we are? Absolutely. Do I think that people who get funding from big business do not have it in themselves to do good stewardship of South Africa so that we can advance? My argument is that there are little differences between the interests of big business and the rest of society, right, in the bigger scheme of things, for a working South Africa. I wrote a piece early when we were debating state capture to talk about the difference between predatory capture and systemic capture. Systemic capture, you just benefit from a capitalist system. As long as South Africa has a capitalist system, and in fact we don't even have capitalist proper, we have a mixed economy. So South African business have proved that they can survive under a mixed economy. Historically, their economy has always been it needed a mutual a symbiosis between what the state does, what business does. To create the early English-oriented economy, you needed a state that could administer cheap labor, and you needed mining capital that was investing. Come during the time of the Afrikaners, you needed a state that could leverage state power to drive Afrikaner transformation, but also be intentional about driving the development of Afrikaner capital. The state did that, working with big business. We've done nothing that is unusual in democratic South Africa. So my view is that South African business accepts that the state is going to be involved. Now, there are people who mobilize around the idea of squeezing out South African business, but they do it as radical sounding rhetoric without an intention to upset the status quo. Let's go and look at the EFF manifesto, since it's its founding manifesto. So while it's talking about nationalizing ownership of land and the mines and everything else, okay, maybe the mines, they are slightly more nuanced, but let's go to land. In that same manifesto document, they are talking about creating industrial or special economic zones in which business is investing in manufacturing. Now, business is going to love that. And this is why I argue, by the way, even when I talk to business, that when you guys listen to politicians who mobilize around the idea that the EFF represents a red gevaar, you are not properly conceptualizing what kind of risks the EFF poses. Because it is not in their documents that they're going to make life in South Africa hell for business. They want business to come in and invest as long as they accept the property relations, the land regime. It's not about property, because property, I've not heard the EFF say they're going to expropriate shares. I've not heard the EFF say they're going to expropriate people's dividends and all of those things.
I'm not going to counter that. I have heard some of those utterings, but I'm not going to raise them here. It's a lot to swallow. So I'm gonna revert back to Julius and Cyril. You sound like you're doing a good job as an ambassador for the ANC, by the way. Okay. Which is something I sometimes find myself doing, and it doesn't pain me. What pains me is when you are countering someone who's trying to completely destroy the ANC narrative. When you respond, it's almost as if, because you speak about, I used to visit my grandmother with the long drop, with the bucket system. I grew up seeing gravel road, today there's tar. I've seen the clinic. I see my cousins now eating, dressed, because of exactly the work you're speaking about. My knee-jerk reaction was to ask, I wonder if that was very much ANC or also one of those CODESA agreements to say, look, these are some of the complaints of the people, so to shut them up and to get them to behave, let's do some of these minimum. But that's neither here nor there. Sure. Cyril Ramaphosa comes in. He chairs the BE commission, I think. They come up with the codes, etc. He makes himself and some of the people that were there the first beneficiaries. They may have been thinking, to their defense, people don't understand what this thing is. We might give it to them and they might mess it up. Let us take it and then run with this thing. We'll sit on the boards. We already know these business people. They know us. They trust us. We don't have to start afresh with, hey, we'd like you to meet Ongama. Who is he? Where is he? You know us. So we'll do this thing, and then in time, we'll maybe pass it on. And they did revise, because at some point there were complaints, what your look will go to, broad-based. He goes to business. He becomes super wealthy, starts Ankole cattle, game farms, one of the wealthiest black men, gets called one of the new landlords. Comes back into politics, and many of us start asking questions. Why? Why would he come back? Guy seems to be doing well in business from what we're seeing. is there something happening? And then many activities happen from there, which now start making us really, really uncomfortable. Was this guy...
Such as?
So I'll go into those examples. But you start asking, was this guy groomed to serve a certain purpose? Of which Julius raises this as well, that Cyril didn't attend Mandela's inauguration because he was upset because he was meant to be groomed to be next in line. Was he said, look, go do the business thing, do whatever you need to do, fund the ANC, you know, what Patrice does as well, even with the EFF and other parties. And then at some point, we've got this Jacob Zuma character, and he seems to not be in line with what we agreed on. He's doing weird things. He's bringing in new players. When you guys did this BE thing, you know, we had some kind of handle. Even Thabo Mbeki speaks a language that business, the old school, they understand. They love him. This guy comes in, he's bringing new... Who are these Gupta guys? Who are these black business people we don't know? And sadly, a lot of these black business people now are exposed for... They didn't have an agenda to build. They didn't have which is why they couldn't sustain. When Ramaphosa and them come back, and Julius claims this, Cyril and his leadership now comes in, and a lot of the nouveau rich that are born during Zuma's era, outside of the Guptas, all of a sudden you're finding PIC commissions that within their scope don't want to touch Abo Steinhoff and other deals. Only Abo Iqbal Survey, only Abo Maponya, only. You're like, no man. But what about those? No, it's not within the scope, which is what Chief Justice Raymond Zondo said at the Zondo Commission when Abo Brian Molive, Nabo Jackson, who's this guy? Lucky Montana. When they were like, no, but Ramaphosa is like, no, this is not within the scope and budget. And you're like, okay. So you see some of those acts. You see some of the pala things. What happened with Marikana, which was very unfortunate. You're like, but this guy's looking like one of the pigs from Animal Farmers. And even when you ask him the questions, the way he answers, there isn't that what you were speaking about earlier, the humility. Even with the pride, Umzulu, Umzulu. There isn't that humility of, you know, these are African people that were gunned down almost in a similar fashion as they would have been gunned down if they were marching against a white company or a company with a white face. Now it's got a black face being a deputy president. You see what happens with the Eskom war room, where Cyril is one of the people that benefits from supplying coal to Eskom with Glencoe. And now you see now, even with this concept of aggressively pushing privatization, which Thabo Mbeki tried to do under his era. He tried to sell Eskom and he failed. So it was like, look, okay, let's put it on pause. And Noam Chomsky speaks about the idea of privatization, that you defund, you make sure it doesn't work, so that you're like, guys, we have no choice. We have to sell Transnet to Glencoe. We have to sell one of the ports in Durban to the Philippines. We have to split Eskom, and we need the IPPs. But now it so happens that your brother-in-law is going to be one of the beneficiaries. It so happens that some of your business partners are going to be beneficiaries. And there's almost this idea, and it was a question I've asked as well, that the apartheid government, there are rumors that when they saw they were going to lose power and there was going to be a changing of the order, they started looting a lot, and they started buying themselves land, positioning certain people. That's why today we're like, Eskom can't survive without white Afrikaans engineers, and these mines, the servicing is done by white Afrikaans firms. Like, position yourself so that we're sorted. It looks like there was a lot of that, but they didn't have enough time. Even with Mandela's era, there wasn't enough time, and they were hoping with Mbeki there'd be more time to consolidate. Then this butternut-shaped guy, head-shaped guy comes through, and he seems to be disrupting, and he's coming with new players we don't know, new players we've never sat with, we haven't agreed with. They want to make, this is not what we agreed on. And it almost looks like Ramaphosa is coming back to finish that work, to say, we'll make sure we privatize as much of the state machinery as possible, so that any other political party that comes in after us, if the ANC loses, we will very gladly be like, you know what, we lost humbly, we are moving. Because we have positioned not just the Afrikaners, but even some of the British colonial figures, Oppenheimers, the Manels, the Hersoffs, and then the nouveau black elite, the Mutsipes, the Ramaphosas, to the EFF or whoever you want will be running the country, but Mutsipe will be supplying the electricity, Glencoe will be running the rail, Shanduka will be with Pembani and Phuthuma Nhleko doing other things. Abo Christo Visa will still be running ShopRite, we'll have Time Bank and Capitec. And you'll have this shell of a government which will focus on what governments were meant to do, just policy, but not really be involved in the core of running an economy. And we haven't seen Abo Ramaphosa reverse what you're speaking about of, we will industrialize the Eastern Cape, KwaZulu, we will industrialize and we'll make sure that these things are developing so that the people there are empowered. And we don't see the same thing from even tribal leaders, unfortunately. That's what it looks like. And that's what Omar Lima are almost also alluding to. That all Ramaphosa are just projects that are here to ensure that the incumbents from back then retain economic power.
Yeah.
So that whether it's Songezo Zibi, whether it's Mpotakada, it's Julius Malema, Herman, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
The people who get to decide who gets to play on the table, because you need funding for your structures, for your campaigning, the people that will still play. It may not be Jonathan Oppenheimer, it will be Rebecca Oppenheimer. It might be someone from the Manel family. It might be Rob Hersoff. It might be Patrice Motsepe, who was a great follow-up to them. And even the new black middle class and maybe new rich, it's nice to see the transformation, but they must meet a certain criteria which doesn't destabilize Camps Bay, Umhlanga, and also ensures that they also get taxed like we get taxed because they're now part of us. They're just black, white colonial beneficiaries.
Sure.
But the rural areas still remain and maybe even get worse.
Sure. I must say upfront that a lot of the stuff you've said I agree with, right? Here's our problem in South Africa, or humans in general.
Yeah.
We have little appetite to handle complexity. So reality is a lot more complex, but our reference to reality attempts to make it neat
Binary.
by the stories that we tell.
We want it to be binary, black or white.
So that so-and-so fits in this, so-and-so. And if they don't fit in this, they cannot be this, that, and the other.
Sure.
All right? So they attempt to clean. That's one thing.
Yeah.
The second thing I want to say, South Africa as a country that is moving on from generation to generation doesn't have to use the same tools to reflect critically on who does what as the same as those that came before us used to use, right? Let me make an example. If I say Penuel Mpimpi, South Africa today needs a Penuel who is Mpimpi.
Why?
Because Mpimpi today is going to say, I was working in such and such a municipality. I was instructed to do something unlawful and I didn't do it. And the person who was instructing me to do it is so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so.
So it's called whistleblowing, and in America they call it snitching, which has almost become black culture, that thou shalt not snitch, which is Uba Mpimpi.
The reason why it's culture is manipulation by a generation whose time is long gone, as an attempt to make themselves continue to be relevant in present day South Africa.
I hear you.
And for them to be relevant, they must impose the lexicon that was important for them on this generation.
Sure. Like Ubuntu, when a person uses Ubuntu to exploit you.
Yeah. Now, I've said that to say, handling complexity says, and by the way, this is my response to you. You're saying I'm doing a good job in being an ambassador for and I love it.
And they've done amazing work, man. We can never deny.
I love it that you say that, because that's part of who I was. From 2006, I was defending the Kucha project.
Yeah.
From 2009, I was a municipal employee defending government policy. So I know that there was a political actor who was Zuma aligned from Nelson Mandela Bay, the Stalini group, that said that we're not doing this as part. Before them, there was Neba and it was Mbeki aligned. Or there were groups that were Mbeki aligned that were doing what you attempted to simplify as capital's gambit to keep the masses happy, right? There was a group that sat politically and made a choice this municipality receives 10 billion as a budget is 10 billion. 2 billion of it is capital budget. We are not going to allow more than less than 80% of it to not be spent in previously disadvantaged wards. Now, this is a political actor who's acting within the ambit of government, making a revolutionary decision. You know what I'm saying? Mm. So I'm saying, so this, there's no way I could construe this political decision as part of the gambits of capital. Mm. You know what I mean? Mm. The decision to build the Port of Ngqura was a lobby by both local stakeholders in Gqeberha, working with business in Gqeberha, and the alliance of the ANC, COSATU, to build that project, to have that project go there. Engaging politically with national government as part of a political battle to then have victory to say we're going to build it. Now, that I cannot construe within the confines of big corporate gambits to keep the masses happy, right? And then lastly, the if we are going to handle, so why am I a proud ambassador for the ANC? Because I don't need not to critique it for failing to do some of the things it has failed to do.
Yeah.
That says a lot about me as a scholar, but it also says a lot about me as a human. I am raised within the context of a family, imperfect as it was, and I write a book. My first book is on family feuds. So I write about a book. I have a father and I have a mother, and I appreciate some dynamics within my family. My mother and my father, for their bad aspects that I can list, right, don't have to have been instruments of somebody else for me to explain why they behave in a certain way. This is family. Family has got wonderful behavior by members of the family, and then it also has got terrible behavior by members of the family. Do they stop being members of the family because they behaved badly? No. Now, I'm arguing that people who grow up within the complexities of family feuds and all of those things have to acknowledge that you can have somebody who goes on and betrays the cause, who otherwise had acted in good faith at some stage in their lives. Now, let me come to the Ramaphosa issue. His biographer argues the point that it's the 1991 conference of the ANC. I think it's the first they have after unbanning.
Sure.
Zuma and Mbeki are the ANC guys who come from exile.
Of course, they're the two young guys that are coming up, Baba.
They are in exile, these are the most respected people, among the most respected people. I mean,
the new generation, because we had Abo Mandela, Tambo, Usisulu, but the new generation is definitely Uzuma and Mbeki.
And
on Chrisani.
I listen, there's this clip of former President JZ speaking. I'm like, this is amazing. I'm loving this, you know. As he speaks, I'm like, you know what? So I'd like to write a skeptic's biography of former President Zuma, where I'm asking him some of those things were you intentionally trying to do what Penuel was saying you were trying to do? Because this is what epistemic humility is about. Because I have disferred with a lot of things that he did, precisely because I worked in government, in quasi-government, and I know what it was to do black excellence. And I remained in the state when a group post-Polokwane was trying to undermine black professionals so that they can drive the program. Not all of the program that they did was bad. The 80-20 was amazing. It was revolutionary, right? Now, so I want to subject myself to him, Ongama and his family, and say, tell me about this. What were you trying to do?
Sure.
Because at the same time that the Guptas were thriving as an emerging big media player. I was among 250 some odd community media, independent media producers who were trying to kick doors at DTI for just 30% of the ad spend. You know what I mean? At that same time that the revolutionary ad spend agenda was being pushed. So I want to pose that question to him.
Sure.
And have him say, no, I'd instructed GCIS to do it, but they didn't.
Sure.
Or, no, the same way that in the first wave of BEE, there was an inner group that got money. I was trying to build that inner group.
It's going to be the Guptas and a few guys, and then later on it will spin out. But he must say it.
They finish this thing about Cyril.
Sure.
His biographer says, Slovo. Because remember...
We're back in 91 now.
Yeah.
Conference.
Yeah.
Sure.
The issue of Nationali Nama Komanisi in the ANC has always been a battle.
Nationalist and communist.
Yeah, it doesn't start going to Kutpulukwan.
Yeah.
So Cyril's biographer says, Slovo and them look at the rise of Zuma and Mbeki and are not comfortable with Nationali gaining complete control of the Secretary General's office or winning that conference in 91.
Sure.
So what do? They go and take an Inzile who has built some gravitas or some credibility building a mine. So he's seen as a comrade, obviously, because he's within the worker movement. So according to Cyril's biographer, it is Slovo and them that do the machinations within the ANC to position Cyril as a person who's going to beat Zuma in the 1991 conference to win that conference as the Secretary General. Now, that's another aspect to the story. Was Slovo a project of South African capital? Now,
he was Jewish, I believe.
Look.
Sure. No, we have to mention this. It's important.
SSP.
Yeah.
Now, here's a point I want to make. We don't have to create neat schemes.
Sure.
If President Cyril Ramaphosa has become compromised, he doesn't have to have always been compromised for us to handle the fact that he's now messing up.
Sure.
If President Zuma is messing up now, he doesn't need to have never been a person who could cower to the security branch.
Sure.
For us to handle that now is a problem. You know what I mean?
Human beings are complex.
So I argue that the people who critique President Cyril Ramaphosa or the status quo of the ANC do a capital mistake by attempting to plot these grand narratives, right? Because now, people who could potentially agree with them around the issues of today now must find themselves just purely out of critical thought. Say, okay, that's what you say. And indeed, his biographer does mention this thing about, is it Prof. Raymond Satner? Please, if you can.
Who the biographer? I see two books here, Anthony Butler and one by Ray Hartley as well.
It's Anthony Butler.
So there's two, Ray Hartley, Cyril Ramaphosa, The Path to Power, and Cyril Ramaphosa, The Road to Presidential Power by Anthony Butler.
Yeah. Now, Sambi Terblanche does talk about the corporate gambits of South African capital throughout history. I argue the best leftist intellectual of our in history, right? Sambi Terblanche. I mean, he's the one who writes A History of Inequality. And that book, I recommend it to every white person in South Africa who doesn't understand why we must do some of the radical policy. Because
there's a lot of ignorance in the white community. It makes me so sad, man. But I think it's intentional.
In my view, the best book for any white South African to read is Sambi Terblanche's A History of Inequality in South Africa. Because beautifully he shows us how big business and government have always worked together to make sure that big business enjoys the most benefits.
Sure.
Now, I want to pull one thing from what Sambi says, what Anthony Butler says. That explains why does President Cyril Ramaphosa succeeds in building a mine worker union, unlike anybody else before then.
No.
Yeah. Now, the argument, what they say and running it in good faith is close to the critique, some of the critics of President Cyril Ramaphosa. So Sambi says, by the 1960s, the white middle class had already gotten the decent jobs, and they had the lion's share. And big business needed the next skilled group to come from among the black population, because what white workers were doing, because they had a monopoly, they were negotiating even higher salaries.
Yeah.
They had become expensive.
Yeah.
So they needed an internal China, if you like.
Capitalism will always do what it does, man.
Yeah.
Sure.
They needed, now...
Labor's too expensive. We need to outsource. Or insource.
They start engaging the apartheid government to say you need to relax the Calabar legislation from a business.
This is big business.
Big business. So that we could have Africans come in the semi-skilled jobs.
Yeah.
And indeed, there's that happens. The second thing happens is that they put pressure on the apartheid government to start recognizing black trade unions as a business mechanism. Why? Because white trade unions had a monopoly over negotiation of salaries. So as a business imperative in the late 70s, it was important to start diluting the power of white labor unions.
Sorry, I don't want you to deviate. I just want you to think about whether this is also why certain big business people are comfortable with having illegal immigrants here.
Yes.
Please carry on, sorry.
Yes, this has always been the case.
It's just the cost of labor.
Sam Peter Blanche...
That's why they imported Indians and Malays as well, sorry.
Yeah, absolutely. Sam Peter Blanche puts it this way. South African capital had always had an insatiable desire for cheap and docile black labor.
Docile.
Okay.
Those are good words.
So this is vintage South African capitalism.
Yeah.
That is why even today, so the other thing Sampi makes very beautifully is the propensity for myth making among South African capital. So among some of the myth making is the idea of high cost of labor in South Africa, which is a myth.
Even to this day.
We
must remove the minimum wage. We can't function.
Exactly.
Ow!
Whereas the very same South African companies are paying better salaries in Australia and elsewhere where they have mineral operations.
But here they must keep pushing the propaganda, Baba. Labor's too expensive here. We can't function.
Absolutely. And then maybe let me quickly wrap up. So the argument which Anthony Butler makes, building on from this period of a South African capital that was increasingly becoming open to black labor unions, is that two things that make President Cyril Ramaphosa to succeed. One, administrative capacity in the labor unions, and the support from the Penuel family. Okay. Now, that to me talks about two things: leveraging opportunity, but it also could well be that because big business was desiring this at this time and was a lot more supportive, because remember, all previous attempts to form labor unions in the mining sector were being thwarted by, so there was no support. Now, in that period, it becomes supported. Now, there's a convergence between no, he was a project and that narrative.
I hear you.
Right? There is a convergence. Where there is no convergence is advancing in the ANC. because the advancing in the ANC is a project of the Communist Party. And the nature of battles that are attributed to be the cause of the advance are battles that go beyond his time. The battles of Amanationali and Namakomanis.
Sure.
But my submission is, let's agree with there's some truths in all of this.
Yeah.
They don't stand when the untruths are sustained about anything in South Africa.
No, human beings are complicated, and even us as individuals and anyone who's going to be listening to this, you just need to look at your own life. There were times in your life when you were doing things that maybe are not that great, where you lied on an affidavit, where you stole something there you shouldn't have taken, and there were times you were doing really great. It's one of my issues I have with our what we call prisons and corrective what this thing of you will do something bad within a 30-minute period and it defines a 40-year existence without looking at the positives you added to society.
Yeah.
Right?
It's a colonial construct, by the way, because I grew up in a rural area where if a guy did something terrible, he's going to do a village walk of shame with people beating him. My granddad was known to be the chief discipliner of these guys. And then it's over.
Sure.
There was no resistance from families over justice processes.
Sure.
And also, once you were punished,
you've been punished, and we are aware.
But you continued. There was no penal colony. Like you must now go and
be isolated.
Yeah. Lastly, on this question, so Xolela Mancu explains, for example, and I don't think he's finished this book, on a biography of Madiba as a tragic hero, right? Arguing the point that it's not you're not handling a person who was a great but then becomes a sellout.
Sure.
He says, but if you look at the narratives of tragic heroes, they do something great, but with an element with a tragic element that they cannot handle. That is part of who they are. So he makes the point, Mandela's outlook in terms of whiteness has to be different from Biko, because Mandela's relationship with whiteness was mainly through terms of equality, mostly, because he was a royal. So the only white people he interacted with that were coming to Chief Jongindaba's place were white people that had mutual respect with Regent, where Mandela was growing up. So he's saying, so Mandela didn't experience the brutality of whiteness that the guys that were growing up in townships did.
That's very important.
And so his outlook has got to be one of behavioral complexity, precisely because of his experience. Anyway. Yeah.
There's a beautiful line from a movie called The Dark Knight. One of my favorite directors, Christopher Nolan, Christian Bale. It's The Dark Knight with Heath Ledger as the Joker. You either die a hero or live long enough to be a villain.
Yes.
And that's, I think, what you're speaking to now. You've got your Chris Hanis, your Steve Bigos, your Robert Sobukwe's, your Solomon Mahlangus. And then you've got Nelson Mandela, who, if he had died in prison, would have died a hero.
Absolutely.
But lived long enough to almost become a villain. Two points I want to make. The one being the ability to leverage your superpowers, of which in this generation we're in, I hope we're not at the end of it now, but being black is a superpower. And how you leverage that to advance yourself as an individual, but to also try and advance certain past injustices, of which now one of your arguments you're almost positing is Cyril could be one of those. He found himself, I think he was a qualified lawyer if I'm not mistaken, found himself in a certain position, whether he was handpicked or not, doesn't matter. He had an opportunity to play a role, and assuming he had no good, noble intentions, he took and he said, rather me than someone else. What we may call selling out or whatever is him trying to execute in helping setting up INUM, National Union of Mine Workers, trying to address the injustices of the past, while at the same time also trying to not destroy relationships with maybe certain white capital, which he still enjoys today, which is part of the complexity that maybe people like myself struggle with. Yeah, but we've seen you with Rob Hersoff, we've seen you with AfriForum, and you're like, it's not the way you think, but I'll keep trying to explain it until maybe hopefully you get it. And I'm hoping the work that I do will speak for itself, so that even after you call me names, because that's what you were doing with the ANC, it had me thinking about Usiamtanda Kolisi as well. And as you speak about behavioral complexity, right after primary school gets brought into Grey High School, Ekobega, and almost from there, arguably, struggle is almost gone. He's in a privileged space, and from there on, meeting Rachel, becoming Springbok captain, etc., it would be unfair to expect him to be the voice for black rugby and the brutality of black rugby for black players. And he was too young at the time when he was took. Yes, he could have still seen and he could still comment. But the way he was shielded, now you have to look at, but in weighing the man, what has he done? He answers certain questions in his class. It's a beautiful thing. Identity. He's able to be comfortable with his black players. Abo Lucanio Magozelo Mapimpi, but Peter Steph Tutoy to Vermeulen. He is loved. He performs on the field, which is very, very important, meritocracy. And he set up his own legacy foundation to do community work, especially in Umpoxo, in the Eastern Cape. And he's been a role model for so many kids, not just black kids, not just locally, but globally. So even if you call him names, Soldiers got a white woman, yeah, but this guy was a grey, like it's not as binary as we may like. I'm worried about this analogy that you made at some point. And after raising my concern, I've got some things that I want to raise, sure. And I hope the answers won't be too long. Yeah. But if you feel you want to go long with the answers, I'm happy to maybe pause on some of the other questions that I have. You made an analogy on family. We've got family that does good, family that does bad, but they remain family. And this narrative is dangerous for me because you are using it in the context of speaking about the ANC. And it's one of the things I've also engaged on white and black people who may not understand that we come from a history of monarchies and kings, sure, as black Africans. That's why even when we look at Umsholozo, we're like Ubaba, and when we look at Umandela, like Utata, Umandela, Umama, Winnie, that is our king or queen. We have that. We've got tribal leadership today. I think 25 million South Africans live on tribal land. So even with the ANC and over 100 years old, with all these, we can, John Langalbalele Dube, Pixley, we've got Chief Albert Lutu. You've got this legacy. It's almost like going through the Zulu kingdom and the different leaders we've had there. And Dr. Sizwe Mpofu Walsh, who you've sat with, has raised this thing before about a vehicle, because we are still, as black people, still finding our feet in this political governance framework, this colonial system that we don't really understand because we come from another one. This idea of, look, the ANC may do some wrong, but they're your family. They've done a lot of good. Yeah. Versus Sizwe Mpofu Walsh saying, a political party is only but a vehicle to get you somewhere. The ANC is not your family. They are a vehicle, which is why some people have been able to leave the vehicle and form COPE, at some point IFP, at some point PAC. Today you've got the MK, etc., because it is a vehicle and it is meant to be a vehicle to get you somewhere. And if your family could be your grandfather, your father, your mother, etc., if you feel they are not leading the family in the right way, you can still acknowledge them as family. But I've left now. I'm now in the EFF and we are continuing with the work of our forefathers, because unfortunately the vehicle got corrupted in a way. We acknowledge it, we appreciate it, we see all the good. That's why we're here today. My father was a criminal, my father was abusive, but when I'm here, I can't now say the guy didn't exist. I hope we can get more people, if we're going to embrace this colonial political system, because that was going to be one of my questions about decolonization. We must be very careful of holding on to a political party, especially in age, how old it is. I know Babu Velenkosini Hlabisa speaks about the IFP very grandly. We've been there since 94, and this thing of, this has been our home. We've seen Ubab Shenge, we've seen Tatu Mandela, and you almost don't want to leave because this is family. That is a vehicle. You need to be very careful of your real family and the people that are doing the work, because there is the politics and the governance, and then there are the people. So the politics and the government's based on policy, framework, etc., and you can measure. Then there's the people of, I really love Mamalo, or I really love, hey, Bantu Olomis, hey, general, you know, a great man. Be very careful of being able to distinguish these two things, because it's where black people find themselves working in white companies, not really supporting black companies, but we preach Pan-African and pro-black because we have this cognitive dissonance. And the ANC is not a monarch. It is not a tribal group, of which we can debate those as well. It is but a vehicle. Trevor Manuel has left the vehicle. Other people have left the vehicle. Some are still in for whatever reason that benefits them. And if it benefits you, I can understand. But if it is not anymore, because if we speak on this family thing, and this is a bad example, you could almost argue, maybe this is the white example, that the apartheid government was also family. So maybe if there are still feelings of some of those people, keep voting. There might be some bad they did, but come on, they also did good. They built your ESCOMs and your Cecil. So it wasn't all bad. And you're like, no, we must be very careful of that analogy. I just wanted to say that before my questions.
You've answered you've already given my response to that. Very important. Very, very important. I employ it for this purpose only, that if the ANC is bad today, right?
Yes.
We don't have to go over historical claims about how they've always been bad to entertain what's wrong today.
Correct.
And leave them.
Correct.
That's all that
I hear you.
That example for. The same way that Asuka, you were never my father, Kakad. You know, you've disagreed with me now, and you've chased me out of the home.
Sure.
Maybe my mom lied and said you were my father.
You are never good. All those memories don't exist anymore.
Things can be true at the same time. You can be terrible now, so much so that I want to leave you.
Yeah.
While also true that I come from your loins.
I hope this is an easy question. I did meet Ubaba Velenkosini Hlabisa, the leader of IFP, Nkatha Freedom Party, in Hermanus at a business conference. And I found myself thinking, so one of their taglines for this elections is do it for Shenge, which is Ubabu Mangosuthu Buthelezi, who passed on last year, sadly. They've got him on the posters along with Ubaba Velenkosini Hlabisa.
A bigger image of him than...
No, of course. So the IFP, I think back in 94, enjoyed something like, I think they were the third biggest party, if I'm not mistaken. They had something like over 2 million votes. The next election, they had 2 million. The next election, it was 1 point something million. The next election, I think it was 800,000. The next election, weirdly, Umamuma Kwazamsibi came in with the NFP. And you found the IFP with 400,000 odd and the NFP with 200,000 odd, which if you put them together, because she was an IFP person, it's about 600,000 odd. And then at the last elections, they had 580,000. Now with the loss of the patriarch, Mangosuthu Buthelezi, and on this thing of where we come from as a history of black people and tribal leadership, do you think the IFP is dying? Are we going to see the end of the IFP in time to come?
Let me start with the question you didn't ask.
Okay.
They are doing what we criticize, but a beautiful idea that shows I don't have to define myself outside of the previous leader in order for me to carve a political path for myself. I can do it while leveraging whatever may be left of the brand equity.
You don't think it's desperation, maybe?
Call it that.
Okay.
It could be true.
Because it would be beautiful as a humility exercise that will always recognize Usheng.
It could be true.
Yeah.
Let's say it's desperation. Because remember, when we analyze things, we don't care about the intentions of the writer sometimes.
I hear you.
Or the doer. So it may be. But it also is somebody who's leveraging a transition by embracing the old.
Yeah.
As because they are alive, they're going to have enough time to carve a path for themselves.
I hear you.
It's beautiful to see.
Someone was criticizing them, and they were saying, but the ANC also at times uses the faces of Or Tambo, Nelson Mandela.
Except that it's been difficult to use the very the very next person that you were succeeding.
Of course.
But to a question you asked, they were on a continuous decline until 2016. In 2016, NFP doesn't come and show through due to poor administration, doesn't show up in the ballot. the IFP becomes the comeback child of that election. We ask ourselves, will it continue in 19? And it did in 2019. Again in 21, they won some municipalities back from the ANC, if I remember, if not just one.
That wasn't because of Zuma leaving the ANC as well?
It could well be.
Okay.
At what point do we acknowledge IFP success as, its own capitalization from the political opportunities,
its own good work and not the failures of others?
So yes, indeed, there may be a Zuma factor.
Sure.
And the big issue now is, how do they survive having former President Zuma in the mix, also campaigning? Because the effect, in my view, would probably be the same in some parts of KZN, as though there was an NFP splinter, which in fact it may be even a bigger issue today. But I'm saying that mindful of the fact that, notwithstanding President Zuma in 2016 in the queues reassuring the ANC in Gandla that they were going to win, and the people smiling in camera, only for the outcome to be an IFP outcome.
Yeah, in Gandla is run by IFP.
Yeah.
Do you think the IFP is dying?
I don't think so. No, I don't think they are done. They are going to give the emerging new parties a run for their money.
You really believe so?
I think so.
So the IFP was the fourth most voted for political party at the last national elections?
Yes. Something they're displaced from. But what's interesting in KZN is that they have surpassed, in terms of the poll that ENCA has done, they have surpassed the ANC, they have surpassed the EFF to become second to MKP. That's one piece of data. It's flawed, but it's interesting. I don't think they're going to be, I don't think in the same way that UDM is going and COPE are going to be struggling. What do you think of Umkhonto weSizwe, and how do you think it's going to perform this year? I think that they are making an offering in two populous provinces, KZN and Gauteng.
Sure.
And whatever shortcomings they may have in the rest of the country, the success in those two provinces are going to catapult them to some significant role nationally. I don't see them going past 4%.
That's a lot.
Nationally.
It's a lot. I think IFP got 3, if I'm not mistaken, or somewhere there.
It is a lot, but when you've got these polls.
Me and the polls. So Gates and McKenzie at the Business News Conference, he said polls.
Yeah.
Because there's polls and polls.
Yeah.
He said the only polls I know are stripper polls. So I don't believe these things. And some people have criticized them. And I think...
I'm an academic. I have to show some respect.
No, I hear you.
To
research, data, surveys, I understand. I think, I forgot who it was. It could have been Franz Cronje or John Steenhuisen. And someone was saying, it's not so much to take the polls as fact, more to look at the movements. And also the emerging consensus among all the pollsters. Okay, fair enough, to put them all together. But he was saying just look at the movement, because normally the movement will be accurate, even if the hard data is not so much. Okay. What else do I have here? I hope the answers are short enough. Oh, no. Look, it's at your leisure. Sure. If you were to project, I've given my views. I don't know if you'd like to hear them. Maybe let me give them quickly, actually, just for context, so that you can maybe counter or share yours. I want to give more rooibos, because I see you keep looking at your cup. Would you like more rooibos? Yeah. Would you like more rooibos? No, I still have. Okay, you could. Sorry. I want to find my my projections for the elections. You're very observant. I wasn't aware that I was doing that. Let me leave it. I can't find it here. Okay, wait. Nah. These are my predictions for 2024. And let me just give the context for the last national elections, which were 2019. Sure. The ANC led at 57.5%. 57.5%. That was 10 million of the 17 million votes. Sure. The DA came second with 20.7%. And at the time, Mmusi Maimane was the face of the DA.
This
is 2019.
Oh, yeah.
John Steenhuisen is going to be on now. The EFF came in at 10.8%. Then you had the IFP fourth at 3.3%. Freedom Front Plus fifth at 2.3%. Now, my projections for this year, and this is just the top guys, in my opinion. I project the ANC to lose about 5.5% of the votes to get to 52.
Okay.
So to still have a majority. Contrary to what a lot of people are kind of hoping for. I am hoping for them to go under 50, but I'm trying to be rooted in reality, especially based on the work they do on the ground. So I'm projecting 52%. The DA, I'm projecting to go down 2% to 18. Okay. Largely because they're losing Umusi, they've lost Herman. I think there are going to be certain black voters who may move to action. I don't know how many will go to Iposa ya Musi. And then at the time, a lot of white and maybe Afrikaans voters were not happy with the movement the DA was doing. And they jumped to the Freedom Front Plus, which grew. And some of them might be comfortable with the Freedom Front Plus or other more, I don't know if you'd call it right-wing, conservative, other more conservative parties and be like, no, this DA seems woke. We're not really sure. So I'm projecting the DA to go down 2%. I'm projecting the EFF to go up about 3% or 2% and some change from 10.8 to 13, driven by young people. And the university graduates who are part of EFF youth societies at tertiary level coming up and being like, so I'm hoping they'll go up by 3%. I see Action SA as a new player. I think I might be overhyping them. But a part of it is their success in the local elections, and it looks like the structures they are building on the ground seem to be quite brilliant. I'm putting them at 4.5. It's very high. Very high. I might bring it down to like 3. I might revise it, but 4.5. I'm putting the IFP to go down marginally to 2.7 from 3.3. The Freedom Front Plus marginally sort of stay the same from 2.3 to 2%. And then I see the PA, Gates and McKenzie, which got 0.04%. They were nobodies. They were newcomers at the last elections, to come in at 2%, with the MK coming in at 2%, which contrasts your 4. Those are my predictions.
I mostly agree with them, save for the ANC, where you put the ANC.
Sure.
Now, by virtue of all your other numbers there, I argue the ANC has to be somewhere. So initially when I started, I was speaking against the polls, saying there's no way it's going to be in the late 30s, because the polls from 21 were putting it in 2019 at around late 30s. I remember this one that the DA was punting everywhere on Daily Mail, that it was impossible to happen. My best estimate was that it was going to be at 47 to 48.
Okay.
But I think the pollster consensus as at August last year was an average of about 43%.
Jeez. For the ANC?
Yes. I think that may have dropped about 2 percentage points since the polls that came from October.
Okay.
I haven't done the numbers. Okay. I think it would have dropped, because now the lowest is at 39.
39% for the ANC.
The highest at 41 point something. There's some that put it at 43 and stuff. But be that as it may, my argument is that the ANC is going to drop below 40%, below 50%, and it's a question of degrees. Some time ago, I got a prompting that said, it was in fact the morning of where results were expected from the ICJ. I got this feeling that the ANC might have just edged over 50% at that time. Now, because it didn't come to me by the natural mechanisms I use to arrive at knowledge, I just put a note to it and said, I'm going to stick to my analytical self and stay here. Because I also respect the difference between what I get to know through proper analysis and stuff, and what comes to me sometimes by other means.
Sure.
so it's quite interesting. It's going to be interesting what comes up after the elections. But based on my natural abilities, I doubt that the ANC is going to be at 50% or close there.
48?
Between 46 and 47, I think. No, because remember, Penuel,
sure,
the biggest driver of ANC loss of support has been splinter activity.
I hear you. But Cope is gone. It was a non-player even last time.
You've got MK.
The splinters are now EFF and MK.
Look,
the big splinters.
MK, I don't want to underestimate, even though I think that theirs is going to be regional. Okay. I don't want to underestimate. I mean, this poll from ANC that puts them ahead of everybody else is quite interesting. Look, reality is that I doubt they're going to be there.
Sure.
But it's an important data set that I can't ignore, in Gauteng and KZN. Yeah.
Do you think MK is driven by Jacob Zuma? Do you think part of it is the Mkhonto Wesizwe logo and brand?
I think the person of Jacob Zuma contributes significantly to MK.
Sure.
I think Ubaba has a constituency, significant.
Without Jacob Zuma, the MK would be a nothing party.
Yeah, definitely. I wouldn't even be putting it at, what did I say, 4%?
4%, yeah.
I wouldn't even be putting it there without him.
So some of my predictions were the DA going down, EFF going up.
I have shared that sentiment until someone pointed out to me that between 19 and 21, the DA recovered a percentage and some odd in terms of its national average.
Sure.
I did counter the person and said, look, if I am looking at the splinter activity that the DA is facing for the first time in democratic South Africa, I just don't see how they're going to grow.
Action SA. Is that the splinter?
Action SA, Busa, arguably Rise Mzansi, because it may not be a technical splinter,
but it might be ex-DA voters.
Politics, yeah. That centrist politics, or center-right to center-left. Yeah. In fact, center-right to center. That, to me, is DA and ANC constituents.
Sure. EFF to grow.
Definitely. I don't see how they're not going to grow by the same drivers you mentioned. Sure. Youth voters. And from the first election, I remember the work of Stembete and the work I've done with Professor Gary Prevost. Those show that it's young voters that are leaving the ANC for the EFF.
Okay.
By the way, I've got a poll that's active currently on campus at NMU, whose results are probably going to come later. It's a tiny poll of 400 people in a student population.
Sure.
It's going to be interesting. Some of the things we want to see there is, to what extent is there movement between ANC, between SASCO and EFF student command electoral choices, and DASO, obviously.
Thoughts on Action SA and PA?
I agree with your growth story there. I doubt 2% for PA. Wow, that's interesting.
It's a lot.
I think it's a lot.
Because it's there with the Freedom Front Plus.
But not unrealistic as far as, if you look at their stance around migration.
Yeah.
This
Abambe.
Look, they're playing that. And I think that the core constituency, the colored vote, is up for the taking.
Okay.
From a number of perspectives.
Okay.
So, yeah. I'm not trying to say they are an identity politics party.
But realistically,
there's a lot of that rhetoric.
There's a lot of that rhetoric
in their politics.
Your thoughts on the new guys? Rise Mzansi, Bossa, Musi Maimani. There's a boy now in Port Takada with Arise SA. I don't know what happened to Ace Makashule's ACT. And Bongani Baloyi, who also left the DA, created Shiluba as well. Any thoughts around those? Songes Ozibo, of course, got a lot of spotlight with this 15 million from the Oppenheimers.
Shiluba surprised me for making the cut, in terms of getting into the ballot and meeting the requirements.
You didn't think they were going to make the cut?
Man, I take nothing from Bongani.
Bongani is amazing
As a leader.
Yeah.
But you see, I was. You see, this is what happens with professionals. We think the world goes according to qualifications,
Of course, and merit and delivery
exactly.
and those things.
And we've seen
Yeah.
that that's not what moves politics.
Correct.
So I was thinking he's going to have a rude awakening to that effect. Clearly, he's mobilizing, but he's quiet about his mobilization. Whereas Rise Mzansi and now Asibusa is caught up to it, are a lot more open about what ground they are covering.
Sure.
I think I'm quite positive about Rise Mzansi and Busa. I must declare these centrist parties appeal to me.
Okay.
They appeal to me because
to you personally or for South Africa?
Personally and for South Africa.
Okay.
You see, I like the complexity of how you build a narrative of you may hate certain sections of our society. We have to work together.
Sure.
So I think for me to not find people that are wanting to drive wedge driving rhetoric is in sync with ANC proper and can't say that same thing about the DA. I think they were on that trajectory for some time when during Helen Zille's time up until Musimaiman, except that she came and undid that same legacy which she pushed the DA towards.
Yeah.
So I think for me I'm quite positive about those parties because I believe that a part of this voter base that was leaving the ANC but not keen to vote for the DA was people who were saying we're happy with the centrist politics, even if center left, actually, but not an anti-transformation political agenda.
A few more questions. Do you believe in democracy? Do you think democracy is what South Africa needs as a developing nation or the African continent? If yes, or maybe even outside of even a yes or no, because we currently have it, do you think people should qualify to vote? Or do you think everyone should be allowed to vote? Doesn't matter if they're ignorant, uneducated, don't understand, get bought with a t-shirt, piece of chicken, it doesn't matter. They should still have a voice.
I love the argument that Prof. Stephen Friedman advances in Power in Action and around this idea of popular sovereignty. Among some of the arguments he makes against the notion that about the franchise, is that it is not proven that the well-educated govern society well or make the best decisions. It's not proven. So claims about philosopher kings or limiting the franchise by some mechanism that seeks to bring some pre-qualification of sort has not proven to be the best for so. And
the best for the masses or the best regardless, even for themselves.
Regardless.
Okay.
And I can't remember now who was making this point about how the well-educated have made choices that have cost society. I mean, we have evidence of it everywhere.
That is true.
So I buy into democracy as a political system.
Yeah.
So I have taken a personal project where I want to look at theological questions.
Theological.
Yeah.
This is religion, religious systems.
After my now that I've conquered the PhD.
Hey, come on.
I want so some of the topics I'm going to be looking at are politics God's way. I'm not a proponent for theocracy per se, as practiced, but I want to look at, so for example, if you look at principles of limitedness of power, I read stories, biblical stories where a king abuses his power and takes some guy's wife and then orchestrates that this guy dies. Okay. By the way, this king is king regarded as a king after God's own heart. A critic prophet comes and says, you've done an evil thing. And I want to drive the idea that kings who subject themselves to higher power have no carte blanche power to do as they please. So there's going to be consequences for your action. And these are the consequences.
The consequences being higher power or?
No, the consequences are, one, the child that comes from the adultery. If you haven't even picked it up yet, I'm talking about King David and how he takes Uriah's wife. And from Uriah makes a wife, and then a child gets born to him. And then a reigning prophet of the time comes and calls him out that kings that are after God's order are not kings with unlimited power. Their power is limited. So Western Europe tells us that the idea of constitutionalism comes from the Greeks, which is a lie. We see it in not just ancient Middle East and the stage of the Jewish kings, even ancient Egyptian, ancient Babylonian, ancient Assyrian kings, having these ideas of you have to conduct power within a framework of rules. Okay, so I want to tackle this. I'm not yet ready to talk about it. Since we're in a platform like this, I somehow feel free to talk about it. But I hope that in the next, say, 5 years, I will be boldly writing, this is how godly politicians conduct themselves.
From a Christian perspective?
No.
Or from an Abrahamic faith perspective?
No, from a messianic kingdom perspective. Because remember, again, the simplicity of the world and tendency to frame things neatly. The Messiah, and by the way, this is also something that affects Middle East politics. When the supposed Jewish Messiah comes back, he's not coming back for Jews. He's coming back for a multi-ethnic community, which he never used any religious term to describe. He used political terms like kingdom. You know what I mean?
Okay.
So that's why I'm not easily accepting your proposition that this inquiry that I want to do is it's a political. I mean, Jesus never refers to himself by a religious term at all, except for one moment where he says a prophet is not without honor except in his own home. But throughout, he talks about establishing a kingdom, which is a political concept. And if you read earlier writings, it talks about how people will live in peace, and it talks about a system of governance where peace and prosperity reigns and light reigns instead of darkness. Then there's the constructs, the Judaism constructs. But I mean, I wish we had more time. I would talk about that. But no,
we'll talk about it when you're ready.
Yeah.
2 movie references again. I mentioned Dune and Dune 2 specifically, Denis Villeneuve, and then Avatar and Avatar 2, James Cameron. These movies highlight the importance of working with nature and environment and being in tune spiritually with the environment you're in and respecting it. In Dune, it's in the desert. It's Middle Eastern Arabic undertones. And there are these huge worms that eat people. And there are these people called the Fremen who live in that nature and can work around it. In Avatar, you've got the Na'vi people who are of this other planet. I think it's Pandora, where they have this holy tree that has been there for generations. And then there's the fights on both sides in these movies. The fight here against human beings, white colonialism, whatever, coming to take over this planet because they found a special mineral. This movie, you've got spice, which is used for intergalactic travel, and it's got these other properties, etc. But one of the things that come out, so there's messiahs, and sadly in both these movies, it's a critique that people have had there's these white messiahs that come from externally to these indigenous peoples who become the leaders of, and then they overthrow, which is very upsetting for some of us. But these guys come through, and the number one, they go through the process of induction into becoming the people, but they still have these old ways, which obviously help them to overthrow these now colonial type of forces, because they know how to use guns, they understand the etc. Now, those movies and some of the underlying themes are these thoughts of decolonization for me. Nature versus technology, indigenous people versus colonizers of sort. You're raising theology now, which almost sounds very Christian, and we had African spirituality as an example. We're speaking politics, and I'm speaking not just to the 29th of May this year, but governance moving forward, of which theocracy is one of them. We've got the Vatican City. We've got monarchs, of course. You've got Umswati. You've got Umisuzulu. In some way, you've got the British royal family as well, even though they've got a prime minister. Should we not be looking into decolonizing and finding Sankofa old ways of being and igniting them, maybe bringing in some of the newer elements, but to say we are not going to accept British colonial systems, which were at least were brought here, and other colonial systems, we will acknowledge them, take what works, but have a strong sense of we want to work with what worked. Tribal courts, maybe having a king, a queen, whether you want to call it constituency, we want to reinvigorate languages. We were speaking about the gold of Africa being beyond minerals and being the people and the stories, and saying, why are you studying a Bible versus studying Credo Mutwa, studying some of the literature of other people and old, and using that as a framework for governance moving into the future, which might in future even conquer American, British governance systems.
Sure. So I'm writing a paper. I've been saying this for a long time because I started it in 2019. Alternative political institution building from selected isiXhosa proverbs, right? It's interesting that, so these proverbs have got conceptions about power and what power means in society. By the way, maybe let me give you a little bit of background. I found my voice in decolonial thinking when a colleague of mine, Ubabalo Magoqwana, did work on Umakhulu as an institution for learning,
as a human library
in the African families.
Ugogo, your grandmother as a okay.
When she did that, I found my voice. When initially the Fallists had started calling for decolonization,
Olympus must fall, Rhodes must fall.
I was like, what are they talking about? And again, this is humility, because for me, I did my undergrad and then I went and worked at Gucha.
Yeah.
Now, in the corporate world, you use information instrumentally to address your pragmatic questions.
Yes.
So I had become a thinking subject who was using information for pragmatic purposes.
Yes.
To the extent that while colleagues were like up and wanting to be seen to be, let me say, we're revolutionary, I was saying, I don't know this one.
Yeah.
I want to know what they're talking about, so that I can find my voice. So Babalo does this, Umakhulu. When she did that, I was like, what? Oh yeah, two things I was rebelling in my mind against. I was rebelling to go and look for Fanon. I was rebelling to go and look for philosophers to replace the something in me was saying, yes, I knew the importance of it, but I just didn't have the time. Now, Ubabalo does that. When Ubabalo did that, it showed me a path to finding a voice in decoloniality that didn't need me to go outside of myself. As a person who had engaged in the world, finding pragmatic questions. All of a sudden, I was like, you know what? We have these proverbs that when they are said, when they are mentioned, they are very instructive about what kind of political institutions amaXhosa would build. Now, I didn't need to go read what Fanon says. I didn't need to go read what everybody else said. I just had to tap into Kanene Ongama. Where did you grow up? And what, for example, one of the things was Akukho Qili linozikhote emhlana. I don't know what a qili is in English, but it's a...
I know what a qili is, but you can't lick your own back.
It's the idea that you can't lick your own back. Now, that is what I contribute to decolonial thinking is that our knowledge in its communal setting, without first being privatized by a philosopher, is instructive enough for knowledge. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So I was all of a sudden able to say, Akukho qili linokuzikhote umhlana. There, as a saying in my community, doesn't need to have first been used by Biko for me to recognize it. Otherwise, it's an exercise in colonialism itself. Correct. Because we recognize the communal setting in which knowledge is coming. And if we are going to decolonize, even the idea of the private philosopher who has now undertaken a process of privatizing the knowledge,
correct,
is colonial in itself.
Correct.
If it is the only mechanism through which we want to recognize decoloniality. So that was my voice. That was me finding my voice. And I was so happy to find it within me. And yes, indeed, I'm now reading Fanon again, reminding myself I had last read it 20 years ago when I was a university student.
Sure.
So that's been beautiful for me to experience. What was your question?
Sorry, it really is a fox, but it could be used for a trickster.
Okay.
A fox can't lick its own back.
Now, I don't know if you realize immediately how powerful that statement is in politics. It's a powerful statement that says, you cannot take power as if you have arrived at a stage where you become self-sufficient. You are never self-sufficient. You can increase in degrees of self-sufficiency. But as long as you are human, you should have enough humility to realize that you may have a strong armor protecting you, but there's a weak link.
Has that not been the story of our political history, where the British tried to do that, failed, the Afrikaners did that, failed, and maybe the current government, they constantly trying to, even including ex-President Jacob Zuma with the link with the Guptas, we will self-fund, we will not need, but this is proven over and over that it doesn't last.
Which is why I do not buy into the idea, back to your question, I remembered it now, that to decolonize means we must undo who we are today.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean that. So I'm a strong, born-again, Christ-professing Christian who is a proud African. And where I'm not saying anybody else must, where I stop as far as my Africanness is at that nexus between culture and spirit. Because to me, if I'm sick and somebody says mantatu mhlonyane, mhlonyane is there to minister to my physical body. I'll take it.
Okay.
You know what I think is witchcraft? Is when somebody says, I must take this herb because when Penuel sees me, he's going to be mesmerized and show favor towards me.
Can that be one of the things we debate in future?
Because to me, then that delves into the realm of witchcraft. Witchcraft is mind control.
Can we debate that in future?
We can. Last example.
No, please go for it. What you're telling me is very disturbing, and I immediately wanted to fire back with your examples of witchcraft under religion, but we'll debate it on another day.
So remember, I'm defining witchcraft as that which compromises
exactly
the functionality of the rational being.
I fully get what you're saying.
Anything to me that I take is going to minister to a physical need.
Yeah.
I take that. Now, if you are going to go to somebody who's going to make a mechanism to compromise the functionality of the human mind and win a case in a court of law. That goes into that family of activities that belong with witchcraft. You know why I'm strong in it? It's because the Messiah, Yeshua, says, I enter by the gate. The doorkeeper opens the gate. Anybody else who enters by other means is a thief. What is the gate of the human soul? It's the rational being that can be presented with something and accept it. You will never in your life hear someone who says they have been possessed by Jesus and that didn't come through the gate of conscious acceptance. But you will hear somebody who is saying, there is a particular spirit that is in me and it's compelling me to do this, that, and the other.
You want to be happy for that debate? I don't want to debate you now. No, not now.
Okay. No, I'd be happy. I mean...
Hey, I always enjoy your show. I'm going to trigger many people.
You know what?
So I have to ask you to debate at some point. If not, look, it would be nice to hear most of these thoughts, or for me on a separate platform to counter some of them. That's all.
By the way, I hardly go down this path.
Yeah.
It's not a path that I've been... In fact, when I started, I got an instruction, I believe, from the Lord to say, the platforms of engaging in the political debates must be that. And I mustn't have the burden to want to bring in this element. And in class, I would think, hey, my students think I'm an atheist. I used to think this. And then one student came and said to me, sir, you know what? And I wasn't as open in my social media platforms as he said, you know what? You cannot speak the way you speak and not have something in your spirit that's inspiring. I was like, wow, I'm comforted. And I'm taking this to mean I mustn't abuse the platforms by bringing in,
I hear you.
Yeah, so I don't know why I've done it with you now. In fact, I think it's
it's the spirit that was moving.
It's the third interview. I guess also because I think it's a question of openness.
Sure.
Maybe it's your openness that keeps pulling me to this direction.
I'll take it as a compliment.
Yeah,
thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm looking forward, if you may, and when you have time for us to sit down, I'd like us to unpack the relevance of tribal leaders today and moving forward, whether we still need the kings and queens in South Africa and maybe even abroad and on the African continent, what tribal leadership means, the idea of land being held under trust, under custodianship of these people, and whether they have been serving the people. Very important as an alternative to political or governance systems. I'm glad you've raised theocracy. It was something I raised with Reverend Kenneth Mishwe, asking him if he'd like a Christian state, just like an Islamic state, where we are governed as the Bible would, of which he said, not really, but he'd also like to have more of an influence, which is important. Gayton Mackenzie said it. I think Herman Mashaba, they've spoken about bringing God back into schools. A debate around what you've just raised now on theology, religion, African spirituality, your acknowledgement as a born-again Christian, as an African man, but drawing a line somewhere. And it's that line where we're going to debate.
Sure.
Where you call certain things witchcraft. And I believe I can raise a mirror to some of your beliefs. And at the same time, maybe try and unpack and defend. Because I'm not a practitioner of either, by the way.
Sure.
But to try and defend the other side. And maybe to speak more about decolonization and what it fundamentally means. Not to say we will no longer speak English. We will no longer use technology. We will not get on an aeroplane. We will not speak to white people. But to understand what decolonization is, because it's a psychological process which informs a physical way of living. Things like Ulysses' clothing that you're wearing, some of the work he's doing, etc., etc. I think that's going to be great. I don't know if you have any closing words for me or for our people.
Yeah. So Western imperialism was brutal. I've written a piece in search of the race of God.
The race being a race?
The race as in
pigmentation,
for lack of a better word. And I've shared it with people, a lot of responses from Twitter when I posted the abstract of it. So Western imperialism was brutal. For us to leverage effectively who we are as Africans, there are two processes in my view that we need to engage in, and also to be able to mine, to do what can assert us to the world, the beauty, the culture, and everything else, right? Minus the mind control, as I say, is around this. We cannot do it while wounded. Wounds, emotional and psychological, help you to know where you are from. But you almost cannot see the value that comes from wearing the wounds unless you've healed from them.
Yeah.
Now, we need a lot of healing. So a part of my work is a lot of deliverance ministry and apologetics.
Okay.
So for example, when I was going through my own deliverance, there was a time when I was challenged in the spirit to say, you remember when you were a child, when you would negotiate on behalf of the people who were doing things to you, what those things meant and what they did not mean. Now in your adulthood, I want you to stop the negotiation. Call them what they were. Because while I may have needed you to negotiate them when you were a child for you to survive and learn and build in your character infrastructure what I need for your functionality, now I need you to heal. So part of the healing is to give the proper labels to the experiences. So you label the experiences, and then you now that you label them correctly, allow yourself to grieve the same way you should have. Then I grieve.
Sure.
And then after that was okay, now you've grieved. You've called them what they were. As a child, you couldn't because you needed to survive. You've called them what they were. Your calling them what they were has triggered you. Now you've brought to the surface the wounds that are in your spirit. Now what I want you to do is just look at what their benefits were. I'm oh, okay. Now I can write a story. Now I can write a book. Now I can rap about it. Now I can mine the very same things that were meant for my destruction, for my good. So I think that we've got to go through that journey. Otherwise, we're going to fault find where if we had given ourselves time to heal, we would be doing the so what better. That's my...
Dr. Ongama Mtimka. We must go and research this TI thing, because I know no Kumalo, Konu KU, KH.
Oh, yeah.
But anyways, sure. Really honored to have sat with you. Looking forward to sitting down again and let's see how the elections go. You're saying under 50, 46.5. I'm saying 52 for the ANC. DA, we both kind of agree. EFF, we both kind of agree. And then we'll see how the new players or the smaller players do. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. This was really great. Thank you for having me and triggering these aspects of myself that I want to keep away from the public.
Thank you.
Thanks to you, Dad. Jeez. That was long.
I thought it was powerful.
You gentlemen are going for record there.
Yo.
There's a message I read here. There's a message.